Hey, Pokedad fan club, it's me, Pokedad, and we are less than a month. I think we're going to be seeing regionals starting, and so I'm trying to get some of the top decks out there so you can take a look at the profiles and see what fits your style of play. We've already done Trevenant Break, and we did several battle videos showing that off. I think that's going to be a top tier deck, but here's another one that could do quite well at regionals. Um, and that is Vespiquen Vileplume. Now it's very similar to its standard version, except for about three cards. One of them is Execute here, one of them is Mew, and then Computer Search. And we'll talk about why those make it a little more consistent as we get into it. However, PTCGO won't let you see the full versions of these cards anymore unless you go into this setting. So we're going to just start off with this view. Alright, so we're going to look at Vespiquen. This is our main attacker. Idea behind this deck is we are going to battle compress a bunch of Pokemon into the discard pile, try to get a Vileplume set up on turn 1, and then we're just going to be revenge and be revenge and be revenge and be revenge and be revenge. And that's pretty much the whole thing about this deck. It's kind of a great mixture between aggro and control, because you're controlling your opponent from not being able to play items by using Vileplume, and yet you're still hitting them pretty hard turn 1. In some cases you can even be knocking out EXs depending on how good of a turn 1 you get. But Be Revenge does 20 damage plus 10 for each Pokemon in the discard pile, so we want to try to get it between 9 to 10, somewhere in there. We want to be at least being able to try to take 2-hit KOs, so if we can hit for about 110 to 130, that's ideal. Like I said, if you can get 15 in there, which is the magic number, then you can hit 170 and be knocking out most EXs at that point. But that's our main attacker. Then we have our trusty sidekick with Vespiquen is Vileplume, and Vileplume does have the irritating pollen ability. We never use it for its attack, it's just here for the ability. Each player can't play any item cards from his or her hand, so it's important that we thin our deck out of as many items as possible before we actually get into the Vileplume. Now we can get into the Vileplume on turn 1, and the way we do that is through our Forest of Giant Plants, which we'll take a look at briefly, and then we'll come back over here. Forest of Giant Plants. Each of your grass Pokemon can evolve during his or her first turn, or the turn he or she plays those Pokemon. So when we get one of the ways we can set this deck up is to get that early. If we don't get it early, a lot of our Combees and Oddishes end up getting stranded, and then we end up having to force ourselves maybe to discard some of our Glooms and our Vespiquens and our Vileplumes. And so we want to try to get that forest as quickly as possible. If we're lucky to get it in our starting hand, it's a very strong card. We're going to look at a couple secondary attackers here. Mew EX is actually more than just a secondary attacker. It could be a primary attacker. But the cool thing about Mew EX is it has the ability Versatile. And so when we use the Versatile ability, we can attack using any of the other Pokemon's attacks that are on the field, including our opponents, as long as we have the necessary energy. Now we're only playing double colorless in this deck, so we can be revenge. If our opponent puts a Seismitoad out and we can't get the lock off, we can Quaking Punch. But there's not a whole lot of attacks that we're going to be able to do except the ones that we have specifically for this deck. Be Revenge is the main one. Every now and then we can Sky Return. Let's say, for instance, our opponent hits our Mew but doesn't knock it out, and maybe we hit them for like 150 the turn before. With a Be Revenge, we can Sky Return, save our DCE and our Mew, so we deny prizes and hold on to that energy since we're only playing 4 in the deck. So Sky Return is another attack we can use when Shaman's on the bench, and we'll talk about that in a bit more. Another attack that Mew can copy is Toxicroak. and we only have Toxicroak in here for mainly one reason, and that is for the Aegislash EX matchup. Sorry, I got a bug flying around. Triple Poison is the only way we can begin putting damage counters on Aegislash, because he cannot be hurt by any damage that uses special energy. And we don't play Hex Maniac to shut his ability off, so we have to use Toxicroak to use Triple Poison. But we can copy that using Mew. So we actually have 2 attackers that can do the triple poison if we run into 3 or 4 Aegislashes. If we do run into that many, though, there's probably a good chance we're not going to win the game. But if they're just playing it as a one-of tech, we can usually break through with poison. I think in 3 turns, basically my turn and their turn, then we'll have a knockout on the Aegislash. So that's the idea there. Alright, let's look at a couple more of our support Pokemon. We'll go ahead and look at Unknown. Unknown has Farewell Letter. It just synergizes really well with this deck because we can put a Pokemon in the discard pile with the Farewell. He goes to the discard pile, but then we get to draw a card. So Farewell Letter is helpful to get us through more of our deck again. And we play 3 of those. In Standard, I think we play 4, but because we're playing 29 Pokemon, so which is a big, massive amount, but with Farewell Letter, that kind of helps us with the drawing through our deck. Kind of like an Acrobike in a way you could think of, except it just draws 1. We also play 1 Execute. And this is one of the cards from Expanded that we add to the deck along with the Mew. It has the ability Propagation, so we can actually bring the egg back into our hand, and then we can use it for Ultra Ball fodder or computer search fodder, which allows us to be a little more. We may have a hand where we want to keep more of our cards. We don't necessarily want to discard something, so we can bring the Execute back in and use Propagation to use it for Ultra Ball fodder. Battle compressing this away early in the game is ideal. Matter of fact, on the first battle compressor, if we know we're not going against Aegislash, it would be typically Execute, Toxicroak, and if we already have an Oddish out, then we can begin putting the Oddishes out, or we can put a Shaman EX in, and I'll talk about why we do that later. Now we do play 4 Shaman EX. This is one of the few decks that maxes out on Shaman EX, so it is a pretty expensive deck. Except that you don't have to worry about VS Seekers, which are around $10-12 right now. But Shaman is what, 40 or 50, depending on if you have the regular or the full art. Shaman, again, we're using mostly for the ability setup. We're going to try to draw through our deck as fast as possible, so we can always draw our hand back up to 6 once we play a Shaman EX down to the bench using setup. We can also Sky Return our Shaman if we get it. We have to start with it. DCE allows us to Sky Return, or we can just put a Float Stone on it. Alright, let's take a look at our trainers. Moving right along here. Play 2 Acrobikes. Again, this is just to help us get through our deck. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them in your hand and discard them. I went to go heavier on Level Ball and Ultra Ball and Computer Search, and less on Acrobike, because this is kind of a risk-reward play. You could end up getting rid of 2 cards, getting rid of a card that you really need. So instead of playing more of those, I play a few less. I only play 2 instead of maxing out on 4. One card that we do have to max out on, though, is Battle Compressor. You want to draw into as many of these in the game as possible, so that we can begin getting those Pokemon out of the deck and into the discard pile, and that's the best way to do it. Though we can use Sycamore and Ultra Ball to get them out too. We actually play 1 Buddy Buddy Rescue, and this card is really clutch in this deck. I like it better than Revitalizer, which allows you to take 2 grass Pokemon out of your discard pile and put them into your hand. This allows you your opponent to take a Pokemon out of their discard pile, put it into their hand, and then you to take one out of your discard pile and put it into your hand. This is where the Shaman, possibly battle compressing a Shaman early on, especially since we have 4 in the deck. If we battle compress one of them, we can later on, when we run into the Buddy Buddy Rescue, bring it back out, and we know that we're still going to be able to keep going through our deck as quickly as possible. Play 1 computer search, discard 2 cards from your hand, and then search for any card that you need. This can grab energy, so it can grab a DCE, grab a Sycamore, can grab a Forest of Giant Plants, can grab whatever we need. It could even grab a Shaman if we need to, so it kind of replaces one of the Ultra Balls. I kind of think of it as a beefed up Ultra Ball, so it could potentially still grab us a Pokemon if we need it, but it could grab us anything else that's even better. Do play 2 level balls. This is good to help us get our unknowns, our Oddishes, our Glooms, and our Combees. If we don't have the Forest of Giant Plants, this is really good to help us get the unknowns so we can begin using Farewell Letter and potentially draw into more useful cards. For Trainer's Mail, Trainer's Mail is just essential in this deck. It's another one of those that you max out. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck and you can choose a trainer card that you see there, except for another Trainer's Mail. Reveal it to your opponent and put it into your hand. Now, one thing I will say about this is you always want to battle compress and acrobite before you Trainer's Mail when you're early on in the game. When you haven't gone through much of your deck, there's a good chance, since we're playing so many Pokemon, there's a good chance that you're going to end up with 4 Pokemon in your hand when you Trainer's Mail. So it's always best to battle compressor and Ultra Ball and Level Ball and Acrobike all before the Trainer's Mail, because every time you get something out of the deck, you thin the deck out a little bit so that the Trainer's Mail has a better opportunity to hit a card that you can use. Talked about the Ultra Ball. Those are mainly grabbing Shamans, but we can also grab Vileplume or Gloom or whatever we need. We only play 4 supporters. We play 1 AZ and 3 Sycamore. Let's talk about the Sycamore first. Again, we're going through our deck so fast that, you know, if we run into 1 Sycamore as we're going along, we're probably going to get we're going to probably get 30, 40 cards into our deck. Sycamore just really moves us quite along into the deck. So discard our hand and draw 7. Play 3 of those. We do play 1 AZ, and AZ is very useful in a couple aspects. The first aspect is if they Lysander something up that we don't want in the active, we can use the AZ to get it out of the active, because we don't have any switching cards like switches or escape ropes. And once the item lock gets in place, we cannot play any more float stones. So AZ really is our only way to get out of the active. Alright, but the other thing is we can use it to pick up a Shaman EX, put it back down, and draw our hand back up to 6. So it can be still used as a draw support in that sense. But the other thing that's really useful is we want to try to get a float stone on our Vileplume, on our Oddish or Gloom before we turn it into Vileplume, because we don't want them to Lysander up our Vileplume and then just win the game, because then we have to use 2 of our DCEs just to retreat the Vileplume, and by then it may be over. So what we can do though is, if we know we have AZ in our hand but we can't really go much further into our deck because for whatever reason, we can go ahead and lock the Vileplume even if there's not a float stone on it, and then we know that next turn we can go ahead and grab the use the AZ to pick up the Vileplume and go further along. Maybe we top deck an Ultra Ball, and that allows us to get into a Shaman EX or something for the next turn. But even if we can just put a temporary lock on our opponent for 1 turn and then try to get it back on the next turn, it's just very, very useful to have that. Again, if they do Lysander up the Vileplume, we can use the AZ to pull it out of the active spot. play the Forest of Giant Plants. We already talked about that. You need 4 of these because it's so vital to the strategy in this deck. So you want to try to hit this early. And like I said, we do have the computer search to help us get that. And then we also play 2 float stones. Again, we want to get one of these on our Oddish or Gloom before we get into a Vileplume, especially if we know that AZ is either a prize or already been thrown away because of whatever. Then we need to get one of those on before our Vileplume. If not, we're taking a risk. Sometimes it's still worth the risk, but it's best if we try to get one of those 2 on there before we log down if we can. And then as far as energy goes, we just play 4 DCE. I've already mentioned that. Like I said, we're just trying to get through our deck as quickly as possible, and then we're just going to be revenge, be revenge, be revenge, be revenge, and that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much the game. So anyway, guys, that is Vespiquen Vileplume for you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. If you don't mind, give me a thumbs up. I'm trying to get 20 likes on this video, so if you'll hit the thumbs up for me, I'd greatly appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe. We value each of you. And then also go check out our Team Rogue Dogs Facebook page. It's a team that our local team that we're using to kind of help each other, and if you want to be a part of that, we greatly appreciate that. So go hit the like button on that Facebook page if you get a chance. Anyway, this is PokeDad signing off. Until next time, talk to you later.